Hello, everyone, and welcome to this week's Global Intelligence Update. We've got a great guest with us as always. And this time joining us is Marie-Therese Le Roux. Guys, if you haven't watched any of our previous episodes, please go back on the playlist or podcast. Go have a watch. We've got a few episodes of her, and she's sharing quite a lot of knowledge and wisdom. But before we get into it, Marie, let me just do a quick introduction of those that don't know who you are. So, guys, Marie Le Roux empowers experts and entrepreneurs to communicate more effectively online and off. As a creator, educator, and speaker, she has worked, lived, and traveled in among an array of cultures and subcultures and lived to tell the tale. From the scorching sands of the empty quarter desert to the intercultural frontiers of online remote work, Marie's diverse experiences illuminate universal principles for navigating cultural divides. Sorry about that. The University of Leeds, UK, awarded Marie's master's degree in teaching English to speakers of other languages with distinction. Her work has earned recognition with awards from educational bodies in Taiwan, Malaysia, Oman, and South Africa. But what matters most is that Marie has helped her clients and audience from across the globe to enjoy the benefits of better communication in their work and their worlds. Welcome, Marie. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you so much, Chris, for the very warm introduction. Now, Chris has to say the good stuff. What I should say as a full disclaimer is I am more of a global village idiot than I am a global village guru. The reason for that is because I've got to make probably more mistakes than many people have. Over the past 25 and more years, I've been collaborating with professionals from around the globe, literally the entire spectrum from east to west, every continent except Antarctica, but I do like penguins. And I've had about 15 years and more of working, living, and traveling in the far and Middle East. 5+ years sharing a roof and a table with South Africans of different cultures. And for the past 5 years, my work has been almost completely online. So I have, in that respect, been working with people also from around the world on a collaborative basis. And then I've had one or more lifetime of exploring communication and culture. And I say one or more because in this lifetime, I've really had the privilege of living many lives. I've been a tour guide on a remote ostrich farm. I have taught in Taiwan, Malaysia, and Oman. I have had the incredible privilege of traveling through many different countries, and in all those situations, having the chance of starting afresh, starting over, and realizing just how much the whole world is full of different cultures. But today I'm surrounded by experts, each one of you in your own right, the people who are in the room with us from the Circle of Excellence, and then, of course, anybody listening to this podcast. I know that you're listening to this because you are so good at what you do and you are continuing to upgrade yourself. And chances are you have a lot of experience with culture. So I'd really like to shift this presentation, what I have prepared, in terms of what's most important to you. And to do that, I have a little question for you. I'm pasting it in the chat, and you will find 4 questions. Here it is. And if you're listening in after the live session on the podcast, we'd love to hear your comments there as well. So the question is, what do you wish you knew or had known sooner about intercultural communication? So this is anything you want to know about intercultural communication, or maybe you've made a blunder and you wish you'd known it before that. And here are 4 options. Number 1 is how to prevent disconnects or miscommunication. So how to prevent miscommunication between cultures. If you're here live, let us know in the chat. And if you're listening in later, do let us know in the comments. Number 2, how to resolve disconnects. So that is after something has gone wrong. How do you fix it? Number 3, how to prepare for the future in terms of intercultural communication for your business and for yourself personally. So, how to prepare for the future. And number 4 is others. And if you have something else that you wish you'd known or wish you can know, please do add that for us in the chat, or if you're listening later, in the comments. So I see we already have a 1. We have a 1, 2, and 3. Ian says he's greedy. That's good. Please be greedy. You're welcome to have more. And of course, the other is also an option. All right. Okay. So Anthony says he's going with Hatton. There you go. Anthony also says, well, let's have 1 and 2 and 3. And I'm sure there's always a little bit of other. So feel free to leave those in the chat. And as we go through this presentation, I have somewhere where I'd like to take you. But in the meantime, it's really good to see how these points are focused for you. I asked the same question as I was preparing in a LinkedIn poll. And here is what LinkedIn said. They said, well, number 1, which is preventing miscommunication between cultures, that was a tie for first place. And number 3 was also the other tie with that, and that is how to prepare for the future. Interestingly, how to resolve miscommunication or disconnects was not a very popular choice. And then nobody in the poll actually said, well, something else, other. But I did get a couple of messages from, again, really respected people with a lot of intercultural communication background and international experience. And they all had really, really good insights to share that I'd love to share with you as we go through the presentation. So thank you so much for your feedback. And ooh, we've got a good one here from Karen. She's got a number 4 for us. That's an other. And she says she would like a better understanding of communication styles in different cultures. That is a very, very important point. Excellent, excellent addition there. Thank you, Karen. And I think we have a few things lined up that are going to help you get a perspective on that, but perhaps not like a rule book, but rather a playbook so that you can adapt to where the different communication styles are when you are communicating. But maybe it would be wise, before we head off on this intercultural communication mission, to ask the question, what exactly is culture? And you might have some thoughts that relate to this to you. I'd love to hear from you in the chat if you'd like to share how you perceive culture, what it means to you. But I'd like to challenge you to think, to illustrate how I perceive culture for this session. I'd like you to take a look around you and think of 3 things that are around you. 3 things that are around you. Right. You don't have to put this in the chat, but challenge yourself. 3 things around you, and what are they? And so, thank you, Rauda. We have another 3 from Rauda, preparing for the future there. Thank you on the poll question. Right. So what is around you? And I would like to place a bet that among the things around you, there is something that you didn't mention. And that is air. Nice, great. Thank you, Karen. Yeah, laptop, cell phone, family. But we don't have air. And if anybody had air, be honest, let me know. I'm very impressed. But we didn't notice the air. Why? Well, it's always there, right? It's always there. We take it for granted. We can't see it. And so we don't think about air. But you will think about it, I guarantee you, if we took you into another element, like instead of air, we popped you in a fire for a few minutes, or we put you underwater, or you were under the ground. I'm sure you'd notice that the air is not there. Now, this is one of the elusive qualities of culture, that what culture really is, we take it for granted so much that it's like air, and we don't even notice it. And this is wonderful because it's kind of there without thinking about it. And then suddenly, when you're confronted with the fact that somebody else has a culture that's different, you suddenly realize, but I can't stand this. It's as much as if you were in water or in fire or under the earth. It actually is an untenable difference, but we don't notice it until it's there. And so these cultures that we talk about today, although I'd love to look at the borders, our topic is bond beyond borders, and look at intercultural communication around the world, especially because that's so important for your business and for your professional development, but also for the rest of your life. But the thing is, some of the cultures that we are dealing with are right in front of us and we don't know it. As a South African, I grew up in a very multicultural country, and I had this yearning to go and see the world. I never really thought about just how diverse the environment that I was in actually was until I came back and realized just how many cultures are here. But it's not just the cultures that are different language groups or ethnic groups or religious groups and the other different kinds of things we think about. There are other cultures that are equally compelling. Those of you who work in the corporate environment, Anthony and Ian, you come to mind, you will think about workplace cultures. And anybody who's worked in one environment and suddenly switched over to another environment can tell you what a culture shock you can have from one company to the next. The same thing happens for those of us who work remotely online. Having worked with many professionals in different environments, I found that there are some who have brilliant ways of working together online. And it's so easy because they have all their collaborative processes and protocols and agreements in place. You know, they are in a different time zone and they will send you a message at a certain time, but not expect a reply until you're back. Then suddenly you work with somebody who's used to an online remote working culture where they expect an immediate response, even if it's 3 a.m. where you are. And it takes a cultural negotiation. So this kind of work culture is just as important. And for those of you, I wonder if anybody in the house has kids. If you've got children, you'll know that there's a different, right? You're going to know that there's a whole different generational culture that also takes place. But you might have also noticed something, and that is that the rules don't always apply. And that is something that we'd like to explore here. But maybe you're wondering why, in my background, I have the symbol phi. And that is part of what I would love to give you to take away today, so that this symbol phi can actually help you encapsulate and remember a toolkit you can take anywhere that applies to any culture you're dealing with, whether it is going to be in a different country, a different culture in your own country, a different workplace culture, or even a different generation. So this might even apply to your teenager or your grandfather who see things in a completely different way. So that toolkit is with this principle of phi, and phi is the 21st symbol or the 21st character of the Greek alphabet. Some of you may know it from physics, where it's an important symbol for the nature of flux. It's also used to represent the Fibonacci sequence and the golden ratio. So if you think of it from a scientific background, you might see the Fibonacci sequence in there. And if you are an art aficionado, you might recognize the golden ratio. So we'll talk later about how all of these principles come into phi, but I think that's the best toolkit I can give you that you can use anywhere with any culture. There is a little elephant in the room, though, and that is alongside this nature of culture where we easily feel well, what is culture? And we easily forget that it's all around us, just like air. We forget that our way of seeing things is not the only way of seeing things. And especially, we tend to think that our way of seeing things is the best way, or even more, the correct way. And in approaching culture today, at a time when the world is so polarized, and I have to say, as a South African, it's been a tremendously, deeply, painfully polarizing week for me within myself and among people from my country. And I think the kind of message we want to see there is what is the glue that we can find so that we can coexist, respect other cultures, and see where everybody brings the good. One of the most beautiful examples I know of intercultural relationships in a context where it's completely defused and free of any political or prejudice that we might have is the wonderful Lord of the Rings trilogy and even its prequel, The Hobbit. And please give me a big wave or a thumbs up if you've read any of these books, or if you've cheated and watched the movies. I'll acknowledge that too. Great, fantastic. Yes, movies count, right? It's an art form. Now, if you look at the Lord of the Rings environment, you will remember that here are all these different cultures within Middle Earth and from other environments. Think of the hobbits. They're small, they're sturdy, they're reliable, they're loyal, they're dependent, they're always hungry. And they have certain qualities that they bring. They're not fighters. Then you have the elves, beautiful, graceful, nimble, right? Exactly. Chris is saying second breakfast is when? Exactly. And then there's 11sies after that, right? So the elves are wonderful archers. They're nimble, they're fast, they move. And then you have the dwarves who are solid and sturdy and they're great diggers and they know the earth and they're connected. Every one of these collaborates, bringing their own strengths. And the thing is, there are going to be weaknesses as well, potentially between the cultures. There will be misunderstandings. Keep the hobbits away from their second breakfast, Chris, and you might have a mutiny, right? So we need to understand that. And when we understand and draw on the best of everybody, even when we don't agree or see things in the same way, that is when we win. So, although that is a fictionalized account, it can be one that is so helpful in just bringing things into perspective as we think, how do we take the most of all cultures? Is my way of seeing things the only way? Is it the best way? Is it the right way? It's one way. And yes, it's my way, but you know what? Some of the research surrounding culture looks into where these problems and conflict can be, especially in the workplace. And some of the biggest takeaways from that are often that because of the cultural differences, once you resolve it, you can actually have a higher quality interaction, a higher quality workplace with better output. And as entrepreneurs and as experts, that is something that all of you in our audience are definitely striving for. So that is a bit of a background to culture, and this is a taster, a teaser of where we're going to take this. So you will have FEE in your toolkit to deal with different cultures. But now, as I said, I grew up in a very multicultural environment, not actually noticing what a treasure chest I was just born into, just like the air around us. But I was infatuated with different cultures and I always wanted to travel and see the world. And the first time I got the opportunity, I was on a plane. But I was not just on a plane, I was there after preparing painfully for an environment I'd always dreamed of. I'd always been intrigued by the East. Now, my preference would have been to go and study Shaolin Kung Fu, but I ended up with an opportunity to be in the Chinese culture environment, and that was in Taiwan. Now, for those of you who know a little bit of the background, Taiwan actually is more historically Chinese than China is today, simply because of the conflicts that happened in mainland China, that people escaped and took some of the greatest Chinese treasures and culture with them to the island of Taiwan. And today, Mandarin Chinese is the main language of Taiwan. And Taiwanese is actually a language that comes from one part, one province of Taiwan, Fujian province, which people then exported there a few hundred years before that. And long before that, like in so many other places, there were multiple Aboriginal tribes who lived especially in the mountains and who today are a cultural minority. So within every culture, once again, layers and layers and layers and layers. The beautiful building in the background here is from a photograph I took in a park in Taichung, which is in the central part of Taiwan, where I was so fortunate to have the opportunity to live for a total of almost 5 years. And no, I was not learning Kung Fu. I was teaching English, like many others from around the world have done in an experience of getting to know the East. But now, being the person that I am to some extent, but was more then, I was obsessed with preparing. And so, technically, when we think about our first poll question, how do you prevent cultural disconnects? Preparing should be the recipe for success, right? So, the moment, even before I knew that I was cleared to go and work in Taiwan, and I started the official application process, I started studying with everything I could find about this culture. And I started to learn how to use chopsticks better and started to practice. And I read everything I could find. My Lonely Planet Guide to Taiwan was falling apart by the time that I arrived in the country. And I'd been learning all these things. For example, when you receive a compliment, it's usually because you've done something wrong, because the culture is so interested in saving face, in giving people respect and honoring them, that if you do something wrong, immediately somebody will jump in with a compliment. So when they're saying you're using your chopsticks so well, you know you're doing something wrong. When they say, wow, you speak Chinese so well, you know you've just made a massive blunder. And by the way, the response to that is always nali, nali, mama, hu, hu, which means no, 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 horse, horse, tiger, tiger. And that means no, no, it's really just so, so. And again, showing the modesty, right? So we give others respect, but we display modesty on our own side. How different this was from so many of my colleagues who were working there, who were from first world developed countries, with a very dominant attitude, especially if you think of the United States, which was absolutely worshipped in Taiwan. And people would come in with the approach that, but this is the right way to do things. And it's done wrong here. Let us teach people how to do things better. And it was very interesting how that dance of the cultural respect worked, because the Taiwanese way is always to be obliging, right, and to honor others. And you'll see this the further you go east: Japan, China, Taiwan, also in places like Thailand, of course, Singapore, Malaysia, you'll have similar customs, and people will not resist. However, there might be a quiet resistance, and we don't know it because it's not expressed. Whereas in many of the Western cultures, we'd be much more direct, right, and confront something. So there must be a way to do this. But now here I was, perfectly prepared. I knew everything in theory. I could recite passages from the travel guides. It was still pre-internet. We're talking about the year 2000 here. Not pre-internet, but the internet was so slow that I had to be very sparing with what I would do with it. So I actually couldn't really use it for research at the time, apart from correspondence to get myself in the country. And so when I arrived, I felt I knew everything. And for 3 days, I was in ecstasies. And suddenly reality started dawning, and this culture shock started dragging me down little by little. But in time, I became a little bit more accustomed to things. I eventually started taking Chinese classes, and that really helped me to get much closer to understanding things. And I was always amazed that there were people who arrived no effort to even learn to say hello or thank you or sorry in the local language, and no interest in learning how things worked. And they were fine, and they were popular, and they were well loved because they were doing something I was not. I was learning from a book, and once I was there, they had pretty good internet in Taiwan, so I was learning more online. I actually was not really connecting with people. So they actually found a secret that helped them even more. So one of my first incredible blunders was when I was invited to a Western restaurant with my Chinese co-teachers. And it was the strangest thing that here they were going to a Western restaurant, and I'd really been craving Western food because although it's sold, actually nothing tastes like it tastes at home. Everything tasted sweet to me. There's a whole Chinese philosophy and ancient traditional Chinese medicine around five flavors and five elements. And these five elements are represented in everything, including the tastes. So all the food had these five flavors, and I just could not get around bread that is always sweet. And I was just really craving a good pasta. And so here I arrived with my colleagues, and everybody orders, and I order a linguine Alfredo, nice long sloppy noodles, and a beautiful creamy sauce. And it arrives at the table, and everybody else has ordered for the table. You try sharing a linguine Alfredo around a table. So there's the air, right, that I did not see. I was just thinking everybody orders for themselves. That's how it works in a restaurant, right? And I suddenly learned this incredible new way almost of eating, of just ordering for the table. So what was better here, my way of doing things or the way that I could open up to learning? But I'd never thought to ask. So that first letter of phi is the P for preparation. Because really, when it comes to preventing disconnects, preparation is everything until it isn't. And that is when we need to realize that preparing is a very, very good thing. If you know you're going to be dealing with one culture, know the generalities, but keep in mind that it might not be everything. And so, Karen, your wonderful question about how do we understand the communication styles in different cultures, there is a lot that we can do to prepare because there are certain qualities that people tend to share. However, if I ask you, are you a perfect representative of your culture in your country or in your background? You're probably going to say, well, yeah, I'm some things, yes, but others I'm really different from the people around me or the people in my family or the people who are typically considered. And I'm definitely not the stereotype, right? For anybody who's ever felt stereotyped or, whoa, you can't think that of me just because, or felt like you need to wear a tag just to say, we're not all like that. We're not all the stereotype. And yet, there are the areas where we might conform. So we can't learn a rule book. But that is where our second principle comes in. And that second principle takes us from preparation to something different. And this story comes from my time in the Sultanate of Oman. This picture behind me was taken in the empty quarter desert. And the empty quarter is, I believe, the second largest sand desert in the world. Being in an environment like that teaches you a thing or two about the power of silence. Because I think of silence that there is, I just have to share with everybody who's not here for the chat what's going on there. So Ian says, even Anthony isn't the Swedish stereotype. And Anthony says, are you sure, Ian? And yes, I am pretty sure. And that is where we also all get to choose, right? And there's something about that coming in our third section around this discussion, and that is the I for fee. But we'll see about that in a second. In the empty quarter, the silence is something unlike what I can describe, because when we think of silence, we think it's no sound, right? The empty quarter does something else to you. It is actually so quiet that what you hear is a hum. And as you listen more carefully, you hear that there is inside that hum, there's a beat, this slow, regular beat. And eventually you realize what you're hearing is not the sound of the desert. It's deeper than silence. It's your blood and your heartbeat. So here is this intriguing, magical environment of the empty quarter that I was privileged enough to camp out in a number of times with the guide of a wonderful Bedouin elder who would take us around and lead us to the places where we could get warm from the camel milk, fresh. An absolutely incredible experience and an acquired taste, but one that's really good for you in many ways. And then he would tell stories around the fire at night as you could just see this scattered jewel box of stars against velvet sky. Unbelievable. But I had several less romantic visits to the empty quarter, and that was when I was driving through from Salalah in the south, where I was living, the 1,016 kilometers up to the capital city, Muscat. And one of these times, I had been speaking at a conference, so I had taken a couple of days off, but the conference ended in the middle of the weekend, and at the end of the weekend, I would then take my last day to drive back down. And I was under a little bit of pressure. It was a very nice, hot summer's day. We're speaking about 45 degrees plus in the desert. And I was driving down, listening to an audiobook, turning up the volume a little bit. And as I was engrossed in my audiobook, I saw, the mirages floating across the sand. And suddenly I went over one of these mirages, and it turned out to be a huge pothole. And I had a little bit of a rattle, but I just kept going. And it wasn't long until over the sound of the air conditioning and the audiobook, there was something of a and those of you who've ever experienced a blowout might recognize that one. And at 120 kilometers per hour, that can be quite an experience. And I was very lucky that I just ended up by the side of the road a little bit skew with absolutely no tire left because I'd been driving on the tire and not knowing it. And there I was, remembering that somewhere when I was in high school, I was taught how to change a tire, and I do have the manual. And I started taking out my tools and basically thought, all right, this is probably the end of me ever, because that road is quiet, desolate, surrounded by sand. There are a few camels crossing now and again, not a soul in sight. Hundreds of kilometers from the nearest town on the map, and we are still here in an environment where there's no cell phone reception. So that's me. And out of nowhere, the shimmering white sand started to shimmer a little bit more closely, and a tiny little man in his bright, crisp white dasha robe and his turban with his ceremonial dagger, the khanjar, in his belt, started moving towards me just out of the sand. And I don't know if he must have been an apparition or a ghost, but he changed that tire in that blazing, blazing heat in under 10 minutes. And honestly, he disappeared into the sands just like he came. He spoke very little English, a little Arabic, but he spoke a tribal language more than that. So I barely had any means of communication. And yet there was pure and perfect communication and such goodwill and trust. Because why should I trust him? And why should he trust me? Now, there was a little bit of a cultural background because the traditional desert culture is one where you have to realize that you may need anybody anytime. So making enemies is a really bad idea. Although there are feuding tribes, when one family is hungry and they show up at another's tent, they would be fed. Very simply because next time you could be the one in need. So much so that I once was entertaining friends, and I'd had my part of my meal, and I wasn't terribly hungry. But I said to them, "Please carry on." They said, "No, no, no, we can't." And I thought, but surely they must still be hungry. And eventually, I had to drag out of them the fact that you don't do that as a host. You always have to, even if you're not hungry or you have very little food, you have to eat as slowly as you can so your guests will always feel comfortable to keep on eating. Otherwise, they'll be afraid that you don't have food left. I had the opposite problem in this situation. But how can we know these things? Nobody would have taught me that in a book. But by having the conversation, that is it. And that is where the H in phi comes from. That is for humanity, because beneath our cultural layers and our cultural qualities and the things that we don't even know about ourselves, there is a deep humanity inside each of us. And very often we withhold that humanity until we're in trouble, or we find some way to have an emergency. But why wait for an emergency? Why wait until things go wrong? And that is why in this second question, how do we resolve miscommunications between culture? I really want to invite you to consider this point of humanity. We don't need to wait until there's a crisis. We know that people in other cultures, and many cultures, especially those that have not become as developed and as materialistic as unfortunately many of us have, those cultures are there, they help and they support each other. And even when there are divides, it's sometimes amazing what we will do, even for somebody we don't necessarily always agree with, or even are able to communicate with. We're all human. So my invitation is, how soon can we show our humanity without having a crisis? We know that the research on vulnerability, and Ian is here, he's a super big Brené Brown fan, and the fact that when we make ourselves vulnerable, we are so much more credible. Last week, I was lucky enough to hear a Circle of Excellence member, Joni Petty, speaking, and she shared 3 stories of mistakes she'd made in her own field of expertise. And it was the most credibility that she'd ever had for me. And she's an incredible speaker with an incredible message. But I'd never had as much faith in her as when she actually shared that sometimes she is still learning. And this is something we all need. And I love what Anthony shares there. He says, I like that. We're more alike than we are different. Having that sense of humanity helps us connect and oversee the cultural glitches. That's exactly it. And Anthony, in your field of expertise, you know that this is something we need to return to all the time and equip people to do. So there's our second H in phi, that is the humanity. And on this note, one of the experts who got back to me with their other point about what they wish they'd known sooner is a client of mine called Dirk de Smale. He's in Belgium. And Dirk had an incredible international leadership career that sent him around the globe on a bi-weekly basis, a really exhausting schedule when I hear about it. And what he says he wished he'd known most was that building genuine, meaningful, authentic relationships with people is the strongest way, especially if you're going to be leading them. So sometimes we're thrust into a position of leadership without even planning it or preparing for it. But that connection is what makes us more effective as any communicator. But if you're a leader, it's even more vital. So that is Dirk de Smale's input on what would really matter. And those meaningful connections are incredibly important, especially when you're a leader. Now, I'd like to take you to the beautiful concrete jungle of Malaysia, where you can stand in a little jungle and look at the towers around you. It's just a marvelous place filled with many different cultures, once again, and also an environment where there are many languages, many different protocols, and yet people have found a very effective way to coexist and navigate, just like our heroes in The Lord of the Rings, and really draw on the strengths of each culture. And what brings them together is what they call makan. It is eating, because the food, when it comes to food, there are no cultural disputes. The food in Malaysia, whatever the origin, is just mouth-watering. And I have to say, when I'm in Malaysia, I am a size bigger. And when I come back, I drop a size consistently. I don't know what it is. The food is irresistible. And that does unite everybody. Now there, I saw a mutiny. And one of the reasons for this mutiny was that people were so used to maintaining harmony. It's such a harmonizing culture where people really want to be sure that everybody is heard, everybody is respected, and nobody loses face, and that there's no conflict. And so there was an entire I was working in a government ministry, and there was a bunch of consultants called in, and I was one of them, to come and assist their teachers. But what these consultants didn't know was that the people who we were supposed to be teaching, training, were actually in many cases more qualified than we were. And more importantly, they were the actual experts on their own environment. We could come in with a lot of expertise and ideas, but we did not understand the local environment as they did. And yet, by the time that I arrived, a number of experts had arrived without hearing just where these local people that we were supposed to be training could offer. What they could bring, and that if we work together, we could actually do it much better. None of the local crew ever complained, but there was a quiet mutiny where none of the information that, or the processes that were being implemented were being followed. And so those foreign experts were paid top dollar, far more than the local experts that they were supposed to be training. And everybody knew this. And all the glamour was going to people who were coming in from the outside. And yet nobody spoke a word. The only thing is, the project did not fly. And it took me a lot of this relationship building and getting to know people and really hearing their hearts to understand where the objection was. And at least in the projects where I was involved, to begin to bring back the ownership and the respect for the local experts, and then tap that. And guess what? They're bought in when they have a say, whereas when they were disregarded, they did not have that opportunity. And it was interesting to see how, as this idea started to spread, people who were willing to do that collaboration got much better results, whereas the mutiny just continued where it wasn't happening. So that's a very sensitive kind of situation. But a few years later, I worked there at a university and I came across somebody who is truly dangerous. Someone so dangerous that when she applies for a visa, it takes months to clear. Why? Because she has a PhD in a field that makes her able to build all kinds of bombs. She has a master's degree in another field of electronics and informatics that makes her able to build robots. And then she has another whole qualification at her undergraduate level. So this woman could essentially destroy the world if she were so inclined. Fortunately, she's not. She's much more interested in going around on her skateboard, showing up at slam poetry sessions, and performing live there. In fact, we're speaking about a complete genius, someone who pays so much attention to detail that whatever she does is perfect. And yet, when it comes to the people who have to have a desk next to her, if they leave their bookcase touching her desk, she cannot work. Now, there is someone who is a complete individual. She was also from Malaysia, from a minority ethnic group in the country, and yet she meets none of the stereotypes. Until there's a cultural festival or there's food nearby, she is completely right in her ethnic groove. But without that, she's completely a woman of the world, very informed, very alternative and bold and provocative in her views in ways that are points of conflict with her family. And yet she's decided, here is what I have of my culture, and here is who I am. And that is my answer to the third question. How do we prepare for the future when it comes to culture? And I believe that individuality, the I in phi, is the key that we need to understand here. As more of us are exposed to a whole global world with all the options, whether it is different cultures in terms of the ways that we do things, the ways that we see things, the traditional customs that we've become used to over our lives, or even the blood that flows in our veins, we can choose how to take the best of both worlds and then decide, especially when it comes to our values. So there are qualities that are important values for different cultures, and we might relate to them strongly. Anthony, your neighboring country, the Finns, are known for something called sisu. Sisu, and I hope I've got that right. You might correct me if I'm wrong. Sisu is spirit, but it almost doesn't translate because there's so much of a can-do, an optimism, a verve to it. And you can think, there you go, grit. That's excellent. Thank you, Anthony. That's a good translation for it. That is this spirit of just, we can do it. And it's so important that there's a word for it in the culture, and it almost embodies the culture. And yet, listen to a Finnish comedian, and you might find that they are very different from your typical stereotype Finn. So, in order to be prepared for the future and prevent cultural misunderstandings in our futures as professionals, as entrepreneurs, as business owners, our strongest ammunition is really to recognize that individuality may often be the culture of the future for many of us. And within that individuality, we also have a sense of tribe where we connect with other people. And so, if we think about it, before I get to our summary of fee, 88% of our time at work goes to communication. That's according to the Grammarly State of Business Report 2024, which is the most recent one out. I don't know what they'll say in 2025. It might be even more. But if 88% of our time goes to communication and we get it wrong, think of the consequences for our well-being, for our relationships, for our productivity. How important is it that we really, really get this right? And so, if you are grappling with any communication matters, I'd like to give you an invitation, and that is to take advantage of a little opportunity I have for you at the QR code here and the link that I'll share in the comments or in the chat very soon, and I'll share with Chris to put in the podcast. You can book a session with me and just discuss any communication matters that you'd like to get better, whether it's intercultural, online, on stage communication. I'd love to help you. And this is an opportunity to join me for that session where we do a little pre-session assessment. You join me live for the session, so we have an hour-long consultation. And there's also 3 follow-up check-ins to make sure that you are getting success out of it. And there is a follow-up action plan so that you can really take action and see what you got from the session. And you're very, very welcome to come and book that one. There's limited availability just over the next few days for this one. I've also put in a discount code there that you can use. It's here in the background. It's this COEGIU for Circle of Excellence Global Intelligence Update 202505. So you can get that completely for free if you're fast in the next day. So I hope taking quick action is part of your individual culture. I'd love to see you there. So let's sum up. When it comes to communicating between cultures, we've had these 3 questions of how do we prevent miscommunication? How do we repair it when it happens? And then what if we also have a way to future-proof ourselves so that we are ready? And my answers to those are, first of all, preparation. Learn what you can about the cultures that you are dealing with, even if that means Gen Z, or if it's going to be just a different workplace culture from what you're working with. Books have wonderful information. The internet has great information, but the best resource there is real human beings. So talk to them. And then the second point, humanity is the best way to resolve it. And finally, individuality, because individuality really is what we each want to be acknowledged for in the end. And I believe a tribe of individuals is what we really will see in the future. Thank you all so very, very much and for your great comments. I love what you shared. And Rauda, thank you so very, very much for your positive feedback. I really love that. I've been longer than I thought because I got inspired. I told Chris, oh dear, a lot of extra stories came to me, but I'd love to hand over to you, Chris. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you, Marie, for joining us today and sharing your insights and your stories. I really, really appreciate it. I think everyone listening really enjoyed that and really took that in. So thank you for that. And yes, Radha there with a really great comment. Thank you, Radha. Really appreciate that comment. And yeah, is there anyone that would like to ask a question before we end the session and jump back into the week? I see Ian there with a celebration. That was pretty cool. So looks like all clear. Brad also saying thank you. Oh, that's so great. Yeah, no, we
Thanks,
really
Ben.
had a really good session, Marie. Thank you so much for that. Just make sure, guys. And I will be putting the link with the discount code in the comments or description. So just go down and you'll see it there. That's for the offline listeners. Great stuff. So with that, we're going to end the session. I just want to say thank you to Marie. Thank you to the online listeners, the offline as well. We really appreciate you guys, and we'll see you guys again next week. Have a great week ahead, and see you again. Bye, everyone.
Thank you so much, Chris. Thank you all.